The equation of defiance, a challenge in the classroom. Ethan Graves sat in the middle of the crowded lecture hall, surrounded by the dull murmur of students shuffling their notes and whispering to one another. The air smelled of ink and chalk, an atmosphere of academia that carried the weight of centuries of intellectual pursuit. At the front of the room, standing by the blackboard, was Dr. Evelyn Harper, one of the most esteemed mathematicians at Aldridge University. Her presence alone commanded respect. With short, silver-streaked hair and a gaze sharp enough to slice through arrogance, she had built a reputation as an uncompromising scholar, known for her intellect and unwavering standards. She was also known for never being wrong. On the board behind her, an equation stood, half completed, a complex derivation that twisted through the principles of higher calculus and linear algebra. She tapped the final expression with her chalk and explained the conclusion as outlined in the theorem. Most students nodded in agreement, scribbling furiously in their notebooks. But Ethan frowned, his fingers tightening around his pen. Something was off. The steps leading to the conclusion contained an inconsistency, a small, almost imperceptible error, but an error nonetheless. A second passed, then another. No one else seemed to notice. Or perhaps they did, but chose to remain silent. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. And then, before he could stop himself, he raised his hand. Dr. Harper turned her gaze toward him, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Yes?" Ethan hesitated for only a fraction of a second. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Professor, I believe there's a mistake in the derivation." The room fell into silence. Dozens of students turned to look at him, their expressions ranging from surprise to quiet amusement. Challenging Dr. Harper in her own lecture hall. That was bold, borderline reckless. Dr. Harper's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained unreadable. "Oh? And where exactly do you see this mistake?" Ethan stood up. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to walk to the front of the room with measured steps. He took the chalk from the ledge beneath the board, the coolness of it pressing against his fingertips. He exhaled slowly, then he began to write. The sound of chalk against slate filled the silence. The board became a battlefield of numbers and symbols as Ethan meticulously worked through the problem, unraveling the error embedded in the professor's derivation. He didn't rush. Each step was deliberate, calculated. If we apply Fourier analysis here, we can see that the function behaves differently in this interval. That changes the way we approach the next transformation. More eyes widened. A few students leaned forward in their seats. The logical flow of Ethan's work was undeniable. By the time he finished, the correction stood clearly on the board. A conclusion that, unlike the one before it, was mathematically sound. Ethan put down the chalk. He turned to Dr. Harper, awaiting her response. For a long moment, she said nothing. She simply studied the board, her sharp gaze moving over every line of his proof. The air in the room was thick with tension. Then finally, she spoke. "Sit down, Graves." Her tone was neutral. There was no praise, no acknowledgement, just a simple command. Ethan nodded and returned to his seat. But he knew, after today, the way people looked at him would change. And among all those watching eyes, Dr. Harper's gaze was the heaviest of all. The challenge. 2 weeks passed. The incident had faded from conversation, but something had shifted. Ethan could feel it every time he stepped into the lecture hall. The way Dr. Harper looked at him, not with disdain, but with something more difficult to decipher. Then, one morning, when Ethan took his usual seat, he noticed the air was different, expectant. Dr. Harper stood at the front of the room, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. "Today, I have a problem for you." She turned to the board and began writing. The moment Ethan saw the first few symbols, he knew this wasn't an ordinary problem. Equations intertwined in a complex web of mathematical structures, demanding an understanding that stretched far beyond what was expected of undergraduates. Infinite series, recursive functions, and abstract transformations layered upon one another, like an intricate puzzle with no clear starting point. A murmur rippled through the class. Some students exchanged glances. Others simply stared at the board, already defeated. "This equation has no widely accepted solution," Dr. Harper continued. "Solve it, and you will receive full marks on the upcoming exam." A few students laughed nervously, but Ethan didn't. He simply sat there, his mind already dissecting the equation, seeing the invisible pathways hidden within its complexity. This wasn't just an academic exercise. This was a challenge, directed at him. Dr. Harper's eyes flickered in his direction just for a second. Then she continued the lecture, as if nothing had happened. The unsolved equation. Days turned into weeks. The problem loomed over the class like an immovable mountain. Some students attempted to solve it, only to give up after hours of frustration. Others didn't even try. Ethan, however, couldn't walk away. Every night, he sat at his desk, his lamp casting a pool of light over stacks of notes filled with failed attempts, half-formed ideas, and breakthroughs that crumbled upon further scrutiny. He had never faced a problem like this before, but he had also never been more determined. Late one evening, as exhaustion threatened to take over, Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the numbers before him. And then, something clicked. A connection he hadn't seen before. His fingers tightened around his pen, his mind racing. He grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began writing furiously, his movements no longer hesitant but confident. The answer had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of complexity, waiting for him to uncover it. By the time he placed the pen down, the first light of dawn was creeping through his window. The equation was solved, and tomorrow he would walk into that lecture hall, stand before Dr. Harper, and prove it. Not out of defiance, not out of pride, but because deep down he knew she had given him this challenge for a reason, and he wasn't going to let her down.